Due to f0rest being one of the best, the greatest CSGO players of all time, and people seeing him in all these major finals, if they saw the early part of CSGO, seeing him win all those titles, the 87-0 maps offline winning streak before they lost one, people are going to think to themselves, okay, well, come on, I know who f0rest is. But unless you know f0rest's 1.6 career, and actually if you're a latter day CSGO fan, you don't really know f0rest. There's going to be things about him that you won't understand. So I'm going to break down his career and his skill set for you. To know f0rest, we have to go way back in time, because we have to go back to 2005. This is when f0rest first appeared. And what happened was, in the early part of 2005, he was playing on some like lesser known teams we didn't know the players on them. And he was playing at these Swedish LAN tournaments, and he was finishing like 7th or 8th. And there weren't significant results. We only know these because people have gone back after the fact and looked and found them. Back at the time, almost even then, people wouldn't have known. They weren't top players. He was like 15, 16 at the time. I think maybe 16 years old. But then his team, he was in this team Big Grip, playing with Robban, who later went into SK and NIP. He was playing with Tentpole, who played with f0rest in this team and later played with Robban in SK. He's playing with this team, and they go to the World Esports Games, which was this tournament in Korea that lasted like a month, and all the matches were played televised on Korean television. But the problem was, on this season, season 2, none of the like elite teams in the whole world went. None of like the top 3 teams in the world went. It was like other teams, sort of like 4th to 9th to 10th. That sort of range of teams were who went. And there were some good teams. There was a Finnish team there with Natu and those guys. There was BSL's Catch Gamer, the Norwegians. There was some decent teams, but it wasn't like some elite level competition. But anyway, what happened was, this team, Big Grip, weren't at all expected to win, but they came out of nowhere, shocked everyone, and won the tournament. And when they won the tournament, everyone looked and saw these 2 players in particular stood out. It was Tentpole, it was f0rest. f0rest had the crazy aim, Tentpole had good aim, and was like an all-round player. Now, after that team went to CPL Winter at the end of the year. They managed to get like 6th place or something, so it was okay, but it wasn't like a super impressive result. There's nothing super special here. In fact, the most famous player at the team, in the time at the team before you noticed f0rest and Robban, had been Iskal, who'd been the stand-in for Eyeballers when they'd won CPL at 2004 summer event with Eyeballers, but he'd just been a stand-in at the time. And he was an in-game leader. Now, going beyond that, you come to the end of 2005, remember, they finished 6th at that CPL. Beginning of 2006, very early in January, a brand new Fnatic lineup is created. And it's Khan and DSN, who've played together in their career in the past. And it's Tentpole and f0rest, who've just come from Big Rip. And the last player is Archie, who he's kind of an afterthought in history. He's not really worth mentioning. He's just an okay player who played a role, and it was all right. He was just an all right sort of 4th best player on the team. Maybe even 5th best. And then in 2006, this Fnatic team, you're thinking now, Fnatic, yeah, great. These are legendary players you're mentioning. They won lots of stuff. Yet not at this point in their careers. Actually, these players, aside from f0rest winning that tournament there, in general, these players weren't winners back then. They didn't have the winner's mentality. They hadn't accomplished anything. As a team, they start off reasonably slow. As the year goes on, they start to get this nice run of form where they're getting all these top 4s, top 2s, but they're not winning any tournaments. They don't win a major tournament, a big or even just a really significant one, until the end of the year. What happens is they make it to all these top placings. They make it to the final of ESWC, but they lose to Kogu and the Brazilians. They make it to top 3 of WSVG ISC, which used to be the CPL summer event, but they crucially lost out in a key game on Train to f0rest's Complexity team that won that tournament. They made it to the WSVG New York finals, where the first place you were going to win $50,000 and everyone would get a Rolex watch, and they lost to Team 3D. Oh, no, it wasn't Team 3D. Wait a second. They didn't make 3rd there. I got a mistake there. They made 3rd at that event, rather. They didn't place 2nd. They lost to Team 3D, and Alternate Attacks with the stand-in won that event. They had all these chances to win a big major tournament. They couldn't do it. But at the end of the year, CPL Winter, they come and they managed to get through everyone there. They have a really impressive tournament. The closest series really was they had this amazing series against the Poles, Neo and those guys, this was the year that the Poles had come up from the fall onwards, and they play a great series against them, but they make it in the final, they win the tournament. They win their first major. At the end of the year, they're crowned. At that moment, they've become like the best team in the year by virtue of what happens. But over the year, they weren't the best team. Over the year, f0rest wasn't the best player. The best team over the year was actually NIP, Ninjas in Pyjamas. Famously, they used to play Fnatic in a lot of the tournaments, especially early on until about the fall. And they would nearly always beat the Fnatic team, just constantly battering them. And part of the reason why is because the star player in NiP was Zet. And he was this monster, aggressive aimer who was in your face. He was talking shit. He was super cocky. He was just dominating you and dominating all the players on your team. And f0rest was already a really good player. Like, his aim was very good. He was a highlight player. But actually, he wasn't the dominant f0rest you think of now. I often to explain this scenario, I often issue this statement. It's kind of an enigmatic statement, a poetic statement, just to kind of get the context of the emphasis of the Zet and f0rest rivalry at the time. Is that at the time in 2006, Zet is what f0rest was going to become, but wasn't yet. So I so often say Zet was f0rest before f0rest was, to explain that concept. So yeah, f0rest was already very good, but he wasn't uber hard carrying yet. At that period in time, he was very good, but he was the aimer. And then you have DSN, who was a pretty good AWPer. And then you have Khan, who was like a good hybrid caller. And he was kind of in the exist role. Think of what exist was in early CSGO. That's what Khan was there. Like doing some fragging, doing some clutching, but also the in-game caller, but a loose style. In general, he had a very good team, a very consistent team, but they weren't the champions. In 2007, at the end of 2006, after winning that big major, Tentpole, the second best player in the team, I should have mentioned him actually, he was the second best player in the team. He left the team. And they got Ins from NiP, who was kind of a support player. And actually, it took them a while to integrate early on. They weren't the best team, they weren't even close to the best team. They dropped off from that level they were at before. It took them a while to build it back up. And actually, the Poles got to win the two majors of this era of time. They won the IEM, IEM 1 championship. I'm always skeptical of whether you should call that major, but whatever, we will. Won at ESWC. Right after ESWC, Fnatic and f0rest take over. At this point, f0rest becomes the best player in the world. He starts dominating individually. He's by far the best player on this Fnatic team. Because remember, Tentpole's gone, who was the other world-class player. DSN's still a good AWPer, still a good hybrid rifler, but he's not at the level of a f0rest or these sort of world-class Neo, Kogu type players. It's mainly f0rest the hard carry now, but he is hard carrying. He's in his flow. He's dominating completely. Fnatic has this streak of like all these top fours, winning all these medium events, really impressive stuff. They're definitely the team of the year for what they accomplished beyond that, even though they didn't win the two majors and they didn't win a major that year. They're great, and crucially, part of the reason why f0rest is hard carrying like this is this era, 2006 to 2008. The uber hard carry guys, we're talking about the Kogu, we're talking about Neo, we're talking about f0rest. If we think about just 2006, we're still talking about f0rest. These guys, because the average level of the other top pros wasn't quite at their level, they were not only the best, but they could be like clearly above. They could win games single-handedly. The level was still that high in terms of how they could dominate the game. So you go into 2008. 2008, this time, Fnatic's kept the same lineup while other teams have improved. MTW comes along, is strategically better than them and has a better team overall, man for man all around. Mouse Sports has a very rounded, skilled lineup, man for man. Even the Koreans of Eastro keep being Fnatic, and they have this really crazy team for one year. Who else do you have at that period of time? The Finns had this really solid skilled lineup. Everyone else improved in skill lineup and man for man. And so Fnatic's lineup, which was still really good in terms of team play and had a good approach and had f0rest as the hard carry, isn't winning tournaments anymore. They're winning they're getting good placings. They're having like top fours. They're making all the round of eights and stuff. But what happens is they only win like tier 3, small tier 2 events. In general, they're not winning the big events. They're not getting close to actually winning them because these other teams are better than them. But f0rest is super hard carrying now. Like one of the hard carry tournaments of all time is IEM 3 Montreal tournament, where f0rest just goes fucking ham and wrecks SK in this final on LAN. These Inferno games is just unreal. He ultra hard carries. But even with him hard carrying like that, they can't win actually. And what's funny is, after that year, which isn't as being successful as 2007, and in some ways wasn't even really as successful as 2006 because they had more better placings then, but he's super hard carrying. You actually think to yourself like, wow, he's going to be kind of trapped in this team for a while. Like, how are they going to go anywhere? Well, they make a gamble at the end of the year. They get rid of Archie, they get rid of Ins, or some of them retire or whatever you want to say, and they take a gamble on these two skilled players in Sweden who haven't been on an elite level team, Get Right and Gux. They bring them in, and the next year starts amazingly. f0rest is still in his prime. So you have him in his prime, these two amazing players who actually end up being world-class themselves. So now you have these three world-class players, at least top 10, if not top 5, all three of them. And they're just bodying everyone. They're just running into bomb sets, killing everyone, and the incoming leader doesn't even have to call anything, to a degree. I don't want to entirely bag on Khan. He had some good strats overall and good adjustments between rounds. But to a degree, they were just running over people. They were just dominating opponents like 16-2. They weren't barely losing maps anywhere. All the great teams of the year before, MTW, the Poles, they were just smashing these guys completely. SK was their rival, but still couldn't beat them. f0rest is in his prime here. For the first sort of 2/3 of the year, no, in fact, for the whole year, he was just a monster. This is another great year for him, but with great players as well. And they have one of the best years ever. They set the prize money record. They win IEM3 Global. There was no ASWC that year. They come second in an epic loss in the WCG final. They dominate the IEM Dubai tournament. They have all these tournaments they win. I think they win something like 5 or 6 tournaments that year and have a lot of top placing. Even though what times they don't win, they tend to place second overall. An amazing run. Really dominant year. But that was really f0rest's last year of dominance as the individual hard carry of this team within CS 1.6. Because in 2010, as Gux leaves, now the burden to carry is on f0rest and GetRight. f0rest at this point starts to wane a bit. And this is going to something that'll play into it later. But the thing with him was he would never have these sustained periods where he was like the guy who worked the hardest. And once he's on top, he's going to work the hard to never drop off. He would always get motivation issues and he would play less. And he would seem like listless in game and lackluster in terms of how he's playing. He'd have a good game here and they'd seem to take a half off here. And we'd maybe just closely lose here and narrowly beat them there. Meanwhile, GetRight was working super hard and was really good. It wasn't as skilled as f0rest, but he elevated his game above f0rest in terms of consistency, game impact every single time, neatening up some of the aspects, learning how to hard carry. And actually, GetRight hadn't fully learned how to hard carry at the time. Sometimes he'd do things that were kind of counter to winning the overall game, even though his game impact was amazing. And you'd see later on in 1.6 is when GetRight's hard carrying fully developed. But he was foisted into this role because f0rest wasn't quite carrying. 2010, he has a couple of tournaments, but then his level's going down and GetRight's carrying them, but they're not in general winning the tournaments. And they're winning one every now and then, but this is Na'Vi's year. Na'Vi's the dominant team. And yeah, they managed to win a couple of tournaments towards the end, but then the fights, and f0rest and GetRight leave Fnatic. Fnatic's left for dead. After some bumps in the road early on in 2011, like they completely bombed the European Championship, the first tournament. They come top 4 at the World Championships of IEM. Then they get El Delpan into their team. And now they have this run over the summer where they're dominant again. f0rest isn't like totally dominant, but he's at a high level now. Like he had a game, and again, I think this was actually in the group stage of the IEM, before they got Delpan, the IEM World Championship. He had a game on Nuke where he was against Fnatic, and he did something ridiculous like, I think he had like 54 frags over the map, but they like drew the map or something ridiculous. Like, I mean, fuck me, guys. You guys fucking must throw if I can get 50 kills. But anyway, he has a good run. GetRight's at the peak of his powers. He's definitely the best Swedish player at this point, GetRight is, and would be for the rest of 1.6. So the team has these great runs. They win a couple of tournaments, a Game Goon, etc., Dreamhack Summer. But then at the end, Na'Vi and the Poles kind of hold them down a bit, and they just have to get some seconds and thirds. Like they came second in the WCG final, lost the gold to the Poles in a super close match. Then you go into 2012. The team actually dips at this point. They make it to the semis of the IEM World Championship, and then they lose there to the Poles. Then they just dip and they fall apart and it breaks up. They go over to CSGO. Now, you kind of know some of this. Yeah, early on, they have the 87-0 streak in NIP, where they never lose a map until like April of 2013. They started in like fucking August of 2012. They win all these tournaments, like 10 tournaments in a row or something fucking ridiculous. Even when they drop off, they're still second, still third, still amazing. Then they have the period at the end of the year. They're still nearly always second and third overall. Well, they had one tournament, I think, where they didn't. And then finally, the next year, they're dropping off a bit more, but they're still seconds and thirds. They still finish second to the Poles overall. Then you come on, they take back the lead again. They win Copenhagen Games. They win Dreamhack Summer. They take back the lead as the best team. Then they drop off and have the slump. They win Esl One Cologne in amazing fashion. Super slump. Get Makalalian. Second at Dreamhack Winter. Second at MLGX Games. Forget the recent tournaments. You know where we are now, right? Well, we're up to date. Okay. In CSGO, though, so, okay, let me give the CS 1.6 context. So in the context of the history of CS 1.6, f0rest, without a doubt, one of the top 3 players ever. I put him as second best of all time, because I think Neo's the best. But okay, top 2 of all time, that's amazing. But a lot of that's to do with the incredible dominance of the early part, like the 2006 to 2008 part. 2011 to 2012, that's really GetRight. And even 2010 you add in, that's like GetRight's era. He's helping him. So he has a lot of help at this time. That's also why he can't quite match up to Neo, in my opinion. In CSGO, GetRight's by far the best player for the first sort of 6 to 8 months. Neo's, f0rest is by far the second best player for, say, the first 5 to 6 months. He's by far. Then other players rise up. You got your Dosia. Let me think who else. Kenny S wasn't really quite at that level yet. Shocks, obviously. Then you had other people who were at least around his level, like Guardian and Scream at times when they were around then. You have other players in the mix. And in latter days, f0rest had times where he comes back up again for a while, but he's mainly just been more on the top 5 level from like summer of 2013 onwards to now. He's been like top 5, dropping down to top 10 sometimes. Maybe during their slump he might have been like top 20, because that might have been the worst period for him individually. Now in terms of his skills, in 1.6, and some of this translates to CSGO, he had unreal aim, probably the best aim ever. Like just in terms of utterly, the peaks that he could hit with this aim was unreal. And his style of how he used the techniques. He's a guy who looked like he had a lot of technique, but part of it is because his talent was so amazing. He could make techniques just work that overall weren't that consistent. Like when he burst, The normal way you burst, a perfect technique for bursting with an AK or a Colt in 1.6, is you either fire 2 bullets, and you fire the first one, then the second one you try to pull it down and get it to the same spot as the first one. You either fire 2, or if you've got a little bit better aim, you might fire 3, just to make sure with the third one. And that's going to get you a headshot kill if you aim it onto them. Now, f0rest would fire up to 5 bullets on his burst, and yet it would seem as good as the person who did the 2 bullet to 3 bullet burst. Now, the reason why you only do 2 to 3, because after that, if you don't kill him with that, you want to reset, then do another really accurate 2 to 3 bullet burst. On his 4th and 5th bullet, his aim and accuracy was so insane, he would be getting his headshot on the 4th and 5th one. That's why he could do that insane burst. No one could quite burst like this. It was really impressive. Or at least, others could try, like Get Right and Gux could try, but they weren't quite as consistent with it. He was amazing in this sense. Tapping. When you tap normally, you either tap one to the head and tap a bunch in the body to ensure you get the kill because there was a lot of tagging there, so you could paralyze him and then just get the kill ensured. Or you tap in the sense of like he's like medium range, you just want to get the kill for certain onto him or make sure you don't miss. Or you tap like 2 bullets at a time, tap them into them, like a mixture between bursting and tapping. f0rest has a bunch of highlights in his career where he just sees an enemy, locks on, 1 taps and instantly moves the crosshair away because he knows he's just killed that guy with an instant headshot from a million miles away. That's one aspect that carried over to CSGO actually. In CSGO, I think he has the best long-range rifle aim I've ever seen. I always think of when he plays outside, upper, on nuke as CT. And if he shoots outside, where normally an AWP takes that position, he can just like 1 bullet, 2 bullet headshot people from a million miles away. He's still got that insane quality. And what makes that insane, by the way, is that compared to other great players, f0rest nearly always had a higher sensitivity. He used to have almost double what other players had. But his skill and his control of that is so amazing. And part of why I think he had a higher sense, apart from the fact he liked to play very loose and fast and flicking and shooting here and bursting like that, wasn't very like structured and really slow and aiming like a lot of the really good but consistent aimers, was because higher sensitivity allowed him to have really fluid movement. Now, everyone thinks of Neo as the god of movement, because Neo probably did have the best movement overall in all respects of it, but there's a very particular type of movement that f0rest was as good as anyone ever in the history of CS. And this was very well known. It was the Swedish players that really perfected this. Get Right and Gux were also very good at it. It's using the crouch hopping, where you used to tap the crouch button and it allow you to sort of move a bit quicker, but without making much noise as you did it. f0rest was the best ever at using that to fluidly, like what he would do it, and then the second he came out of the animation of that, where you could start to fire, where you were like slowed for half a second, you could start to fire, he would perfectly be on it, then he'd be moving again. And his movement, the fluidity of it is what is amazing. It was just so perfect. It's almost like he had the most flawless technique and timing for when to do that of anyone I've ever seen. Now, the downsides of f0rest, for all that incredible skill, and yes, remember, he was a super hard carry from 2007 to 2008. He was one of the hardest carries I've ever seen. Amazing level, consistently, tournament to tournament, and against every type of opponent. Although, admittedly, he was always better when he was playing against SK. He used to dominate SK. He used to be pretty well against the Poles. Poles could half compete with him and shut him down to a degree because they could get it into the 2v2 situation where he wasn't as strong. He wasn't as strong in the clutch as he was in the middle of the beginning of the round. But the team that used to be able to shut him down was the MTW Danish team. Aves teams played really well around him. They could somehow neutralize him to a degree, but even then he was still a great player. He's still going to get his. You could just neutralize him from dominating your team or winning the game definitely for his team. It'd take other teammates to do it. Go beyond his carry potential there. He wasn't as consistent in his latter years. Like I say, he wasn't hard carrying the same degree. Get Right took over. He had his motivation issues that maybe cost him. As a person, by the way, I don't think it's that if he did just practice harder, he'd been great. I don't think as a person, he's a guy who could do that. To really enjoy the game, he had to play from sort of a joy of the game and to be fired up naturally into it. He couldn't just force himself to, in the way that I Get Right could just grind the game out to that degree. He had nerves in terms of major finals. This has to be said. f0rest lost the majority of his major finals. By the way, I'm talking about in 1.6 here. I'll relate this to CSGO because the same pattern happened in CSGO. He lost the majority of the major finals he played in. He played in 7 major finals in his career. And he was a favourite in 5 of the 7, but he only won 3 major titles. Now, yes, a lot of them were close, a lot of them were to other great teams he was losing to, but those numbers don't look good on paper. Made it to 7, favourite to win 5, only won 3. Those aren't as great. Now listen, 3 is still a lot. 3 will still make you one of the greatest players ever. Not many players have won more than 3, but his opportunities were a lot more than some of these other players who maybe won 3 or 4. Let's compare that to Neo, the guy who you're always going to have to contrast him against when you're talking about the greatest players in 1.6. Neo made it to 9 major finals. He was a favourite in only 3 of them, and he won 7 of them. Think about that. 9 finals, favourite in 3, won 7. Now let's add in, when not just being a favourite, were you ever an underdog in a final? f0rest was only an underdog In 0 finals, I shouldn't even phrase that, he was never an underdog. In his 7 finals, he was never an underdog. So in a sense, yeah, he was only the favourite in 5. There was 2 where he was just on the brink. It was 50-50. But he was never the underdog, and yet he only won 3 of the 7. Now, in Neo's case, in these 9 finals he was in, we know, like I said, he was only the favourite in 3. Of the 9 finals he was in, it was never 50-50. He was an underdog in 6 of the 9 finals, yet he won 7 titles. Just contrasting there, yes, obviously Neil's the greatest player ever. He's an impossible benchmark to reach. He's not only amazing and an all-round player, but he's very clutch. And he played in a team that really, he could do everything his team needed. He's the unreachable standard for me. That's why he's the best. But in Neo's case, you have to look at this as a pattern of what's happening in f0rest's case, rather. You have to look at what's happening on f0rest's side of things. He has issues here. He doesn't have the same clutchness to a degree. Now, you go into, in fact, you know what? I'll quickly break that down for you, the 1.6 finals, because people won't know them. So I'll explain, I'll go through how that works in terms of the favourites, etc. The first major final, ESWC 2006. He's facing MIBR. Now, at the time, Fnatic wasn't some godlike team, so they weren't expected to win. But again, MIBR's never won a major, so that one we'll say is an even 50-50, and he loses that one. CPL Winter at the end of the year, I'll say here he's a slight favourite, because even though the team he's facing, the MYM team, the Norwegian one with Real and Element and those guys, even though that's, and PRB, even though that team's not like a favourite, because they've never won a big tournament, also Fnatic still hasn't won a big tournament, and they're a better team slightly, so I'll give them a slight favourite there, and they won that one. In 2009, yeah, there's like a massive gap there of like 2 years where he never went in a final, major final. 2009, IEM3 Global Finals. Even though this is where the Fnatic run starts, the dominance of 2009, at the time, they'd only finished 4th in the European tournament, right, like the week before. And the team they're facing are the Poles, who obviously have won ESWC the year before, one of the greatest teams ever, already have like 2 or 3 majors in the bag. And let me think, they must have had more than that, actually. I think they already had 4 majors in the bag, where f0rest only has 1. So I'll give the Poles the slight favourites there, because, yeah, the Fnatic team was great. The Poles were on a little bit of a dip from the year before, but okay, slight favourite to the Poles there. So let me think. No, I think for that one I gave Fnatic a slight favourite, because their form was a bit better. Meanwhile, the Poles actually had been slumping for something like, since the ESWC, so like 8 or 9 months they'd been slumping. So actually slight favourite to f0rest team there, and he won that one. So he's won 2 of the ones he's a slight favourite in. He's lost one he's a 50-50 in. WCG 2009, he's actually a big favourite in this, because his teams dominate the whole year, and the Poles haven't done anything significant. Like they lost to MYM, the Swedish one, at the previous tournament, IEM Dubai. Big favourite, loses to again an amazing final, Neo, etc. IEM4 Global Finals, 2010 March. Big favourites to win. Na'Vi, a Ukrainian team's never won a major, never even been in the final of a major. Na'Vi gets in the final, they beat them 2-0. He lost a final here where he's a big favourite. Markov and the gang win, and they go into a dominant year. ESWC 2011 final. 50-50 here, because even though Na'Vi was a great team, they had all these majors, they'd been in kind of a slump at that point. They hadn't won a tournament since the major, which was back in, well, I guess technically they won the Intel Challenge Cup, but in terms of big tournament, hadn't won the majors since March, and this tournament's in like, I think it's like October or something. So you go to October when this ESWC final is, we'll say 50-50 here for SK and Na'Vi, and he manages to win this one. Last major final, WCG 2011, I think it was like November / I think maybe early December of 2011. Slight favourites, playing ESC in the final. ESC haven't won a major since 2009. Yeah, that's right. Hadn't won a major since 2009. SK's won a bunch of tournaments that year and been very good and just won ESWC. I'll give them slight favourite because it was very evenly matched between the two every time they played. He lost this one. So there's how it worked out, just in case you ever want a breakdown. Now let's go into CSGO. In CSGO, the same things happened. There have been 4 major tournaments in CSGO. f0rest has played in all 4 finals and he's won 1 title. Now let's break them down. The first final, Dreamhack Winter major final. Big favourite. It's not a joke that everyone thought that whoever won the semi-final between NiP and Verigames would be the team that would win. They should have won. They were the best team by far. NiP was a big underdog. Fnatic was a big underdog. They hadn't even had a sick run to get there. They hadn't even beaten any big-name teams to get to the final in that sense. They should, on paper, have been a big favourite, but they lost to Fnatic there. They've lost one where they were a big favourite. Against the Poles. Everyone else will say this was a big advantage to the Poles. They were all hot and it was in Poland and all that. Like, shut up. NiP was still a great team, was an amazing team, and had a sick run themselves. That was a 50-50 final on paper. And if it had been drafted differently, they hadn't picked Mirage, it definitely was a 50-50. Now, the polls completely outplay them, win 2-0. They lose that one, a 50-50. They've lost that. They've lost 2 so far. 1 they were a favourite in, 1 50-50. Now we'll go to Esl One Cologne. Here's what's amazing. Esl One Cologne final, Nip's an underdog. I won't say a massive one, because Fnatic hadn't won anything with that new lineup, but it had a very skilled lineup. They had a very strong run to get to the final. Nip's been very shaky, sneaking through 2 series where they're winning on cobblestone, last map, 16-14 in like bullshit fashion. Close to losing all throughout the tournament. They make it to the final. Slight underdog. This time they win. They've got one in the bag. Now you go to the last one. Dreamhack Winter Final. People are going to want to say 50-50 here, but I'll say slight underdog. And what I mean by that is I think LDLC was the better team. They won, and it was obviously a close match. But Nip wasn't even necessarily supposed to get past Virtus Pro. They weren't actually that level. They don't have the brand new tournament with Makalele. LDLC was a clear top 2 team in the world. At the same time, they hadn't won any big tournaments with all the other elite teams there. So I'll say only slight favourite. And obviously Nip lost that. So they lost 3 out of the 4 finals. The only one they won was the one where they were a slight underdog, actually. Actually, no, I've just said they were a slight underdog twice. Well, they won one of the ones where they were a slight underdog. So yeah, the same thing's happening. The same sort of nerves that are manifesting into it, or just not being able to have that game impact when you, like, you can't demand that you have the game impact. Whereas like Neo and Get Right, and even to a degree Kenny S to a degree, can force themselves to somehow have game impact. For us, it's more up and down. It's more mercurial. It's not the case. So anyway, yeah, that's who f0rest is. That's who he was in 1.6. That's who he is in CSGO. I think I've given a very fair overall assessment here. He's one of the greatest players ever. He's great in a different way. He's not great like the guy who always hits the clutch shot, but he's the guy who gets you to the point where if you then have a closer, it doesn't have to be the get right guy. If you don't have a good closer, they can close the game out for you. And he's not the same as a Neo type guy, but he has his own strengths in other areas. One of the greatest players ever.